The US President Donald Trump has threatened a 25% import tax on Apple unless iPhones are made in the United States.
Trump just threatened Apple with tariffs again, and that's reigniting fears of a global trade war. But what exactly is a trade war? Simply, it's when countries slap extra taxes, called tariffs, on each other's goods to try and gain an economic advantage. In today's video, we're simulating a massive global trade war, starting with the biggest showdown, the US versus China. Then we'll move on to the US and the European Union, and eventually, how other countries get dragged into the mess. Let's see how this could shake up the entire world economy. Let's dive in. US and China have been locked in the biggest trade war in recent history. It all kicked off back in 2018 when the United States, under President Donald Trump, launched a bold and aggressive trade offensive against China. In a move that shook global markets, the U.S. imposed tariffs on more than $200 billion worth of Chinese imports. The goal? To shrink a ballooning trade deficit and force Beijing to address long-standing concerns over intellectual property theft, forced technology transfers, and unfair subsidies to Chinese companies. This wasn't just a policy shift. It was the start of an economic battle that would impact nearly every industry, from electronics and clothing to automobiles and agriculture. And it marked the beginning of what many now call the largest trade war of the 21st century. China fired back with tariffs on American products, escalating tensions into a full-blown trade war. These tariffs caused prices to jump for everyday goods, from electronics to clothing, putting pressure on consumers in both countries. Supply chains were disrupted as companies rushed to move manufacturing out of China to countries like Vietnam and Mexico, leading to delays and increased costs worldwide. U.S. farmers also suffered as China restricted agricultural imports, while Chinese manufacturers lost access to some U.S. technologies, creating a lose-lose situation. In 2018, the U.S. took another bold step by imposing 25% tariffs on steel and 10% tariffs on aluminum imports from the European Union, Canada, Mexico, and other key allies. The official reason cited was national security risks under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, claiming that relying heavily on foreign metals could threaten America's defense industry. This move shocked many of America's closest allies, who saw it as unfair and unjustified protectionism. The tariffs sparked widespread backlash across Europe and beyond, escalating tensions and triggering retaliatory measures on products ranging from motorcycles to bourbon whiskey. The ripple effects of these tariffs didn't just strain political relationships. They disrupted supply chains and increased costs for manufacturers and consumers worldwide. The EU retaliated quickly, slapping tariffs on $3.3 billion worth of American goods, including bourbon, Levi's jeans, and Harley-Davidson motorcycles. These countermeasures deeply impacted the European auto industry, as the U.S. considered even more tariffs on EU car imports, threatening a sector worth over 21 billion euros annually. Meanwhile, American agriculture suffered, as the EU redirected its imports away from U.S. suppliers. Farmers in rural America faced declining sales and uncertain futures. Globally, markets reacted. The European Commission lowered its GDP forecast, citing trade tensions as a key risk to economic growth. This standoff revealed how quickly a trade dispute between allies can ripple across the global economy. After the U.S. fired its first shots in this escalating trade war, other countries wasted no time in responding. Canada, one of America's closest neighbors and trading partners, quickly retaliated by imposing $29.8 billion worth of tariffs on a wide range of U.S. goods. These retaliatory tariffs targeted key industries such as steel and aluminum, but also extended to some unexpected items like maple syrup and ketchup, products that are iconic to Canadian culture. This tit-for-tat approach highlighted how deeply intertwined global trade had become, turning even everyday consumer goods into bargaining chips in this high-stakes economic conflict. The escalating tariffs created uncertainty for businesses on both sides of the border and sent shockwaves through supply chains. Mexico hit back with tariffs on pork, apples, and bourbon, directly targeting politically sensitive states. Even close allies like Japan raised concerns and hinted at retaliatory measures, especially around auto parts and electronics, sectors that power their export economy. As more countries joined a retaliation game, the global economy began to feel the pressure. Simulations showed slower GDP growth, especially in trade-heavy regions. Inflation ticked up as supply chains broke and currencies became unstable. The IMF estimated in 2019 that a full-scale global trade war could wipe out $700 billion from the world economy. The message was clear: in a deeply connected world, no country walks away unscathed. Trade wars have no real winners, only economic fallout. Now, imagine this scenario. Tariffs keep escalating and neither side is willing to back down. Trade alliances harden, countries double down on retaliations, and tensions spill over into every corner of the global economy. In our simulation, this relentless escalation triggers a severe global recession risk. Businesses face skyrocketing costs, supply chains break down, and consumer confidence plummets. Markets become volatile, stock prices dive, and investment grinds to a halt. Economists warn that prolonged trade wars could shave off billions from the world's GDP, pushing economies into turmoil and sparking widespread unemployment. This worst-case scenario shows just how fragile and interconnected the global trade system is. When countries clash economically, no one truly wins. As companies lose access to cheap imports or export markets, supply chains collapse, manufacturing halts. Vital components like semiconductors or rare earth materials get stuck behind borders. Stock markets panic. In a similar real-world moment, the Dow dropped over 600 points in May 2019 after new China tariffs were announced. The impact spreads like wildfire, especially to developing nations that rely on exports or aid. Unemployment spikes globally. Small businesses fold. According to a UN report, the 2018 to 2019 trade tensions pushed global poverty risks up, especially in African and South Asian economies. When global cooperation breaks down, the poorest suffer the most. Food prices climb, essentials become unaffordable, and millions are pushed closer to the poverty line. The warning is clear. If trade wars spiral out of control, the damage is no longer about politics. It's about people. So what did we learn from this simulation? Trade wars aren't just political chess moves. They're economic earthquakes. What begins as a tactic for leverage can quickly spiral into global chaos. Higher prices at your local store, lost jobs in factories and farms, disruptions in everyday essentials, from phones to food. Even a single tariff can trigger unintended consequences across borders and across your wallet. In fact, according to the Peterson Institute, U.S. consumers bore nearly the entire burden of tariffs placed on Chinese goods during 2018 to 2019. This isn't just theory, it's real life. And it affects you. Whether you're in the U.S., Europe, Asia, or Africa, we're all connected. So the next time you hear a headline about tariffs or trade deals, don't ignore it. Stay informed. Ask questions. Because in the global economy, what happens in Washington or Beijing ends up in your shopping cart.